Our next speaker is Rob Davis. He is the director of the Center for Pollinators and Energy at Fresh Energy, a 501c3 nonprofit. Davis's work on pollinator-friendly solar has been recognized by the U.S. Department of Energy and featured in training by the U.S. Department of Interior's National Conservation Training Center. So welcome, Rob.
Good afternoon. How are we all doing? There is still coffee in the back. I have had plenty. You know, it's great to follow Lee and have him talk about pollinator-friendly solar. In thinking about how we can coordinate our presentations, I kind of took the "so what is this thing anyway?" But I was in DC last week for the pollinator protection meeting with Andy Ernst and a few other folks, and it's really exciting for solar to be part of this new community, because you've been thinking about, you know, how do we preserve pollinators in the roadsides and the transmission lines and all the different right-of-ways, and I just get to come to this new party and say, hey, I brought on my solar friends with all their money, and I'm trying to convince them to plant more habitat. So we're really excited to be part of the solution and want to see this happen faster and make a real difference in the world. So here's a great photo of pollinator-friendly solar. This is the exact picture that I came across 3 years ago when we basically came across some of our strongest donors. You know, a lot of people call us an environmental nonprofit. Some folks call us an energy nonprofit. But ultimately, solar was taking off like crazy, going from 15 megawatts to more than 500 megawatts in Minnesota. And there were several of our most passionate supporters that said, what are you guys doing? That's going to use up productive farmland. Shouldn't that stuff be on the rooftops? But we know that we need the kind of solar that can be competitive with large-scale coal-fired power plants and other kinds of fossil fuel generation. We need large-scale solar, we need rooftop solar, we need all of it. But if there were some people that were saying that maybe solar isn't a productive use of farmland, then we're going to have a significant problem building any more solar. So I typed into Google biodiversity, solar, and I came across this. And I found out that maybe not on all sites, but certainly on a large number of sites, between 10,000 and 15,000 acres throughout Europe, this is a standard practice. Establishing a low-growing perennial meadow across, under and around the array area. So you guys know, how to manage habitat. The catch and the caveat here with solar is that you've got to keep it below that lower edge of the panels. So sometimes that's 24 inches on a fixed system. On a tracker system where the panels move a little bit, it might be a little higher, 30 inches or so. But ultimately, you just need to be really thoughtful and have some really good training to design that seed mix so you get a high-performance seed mix. So you're not going in there and thinking that mowing is some kind of management. It's not. So this is ultimately what pollinator-friendly solar looks like. We've got some video. This site here is in Minnesota. I think I have to do one of these things. There we go. We've got some black-eyed Susans. Now this is just after 1 year of establishment. And that's our board meeting that we had. And then this site was planted in 2014, and I got the worst sunburn of my life last year when I just sat on this site like some kind of National Geographic photographer, waiting for this bumblebee to do just the right thing, and he did. Or she did, excuse me. The size of that bumblebee, that's definitely a female. But this is just shot with my iPhone with that slow-mo feature, and this site was just absolutely stunning. Of course, this year the site looked totally different. It wasn't a blanket of black-eyed Susans. It was some black-eyed Susans, but then a lot more biodiversity coming throughout the site. But I will tell you this: they mowed this site once. It was last November, and throughout the summer this year, they had some mulleins coming up. But they just, did some little management, but they didn't have to bring in heavy equipment to do the management on this site. So this is a site it's a tiny solar site, but it was the largest solar site in 2014 among all of the cooperatives, electric cooperatives in the state of Minnesota. So it was a 245 kilowatt site, which is about 1.2 acres, and the whole site was designed with gravel. And then at the very last minute, the marketing people found out and went, whoa, 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 point of order. This is just going to look terrible. What are we saying to the community? This isn't a co-op value. You know, co-op values are care for the community and connection to the community, and and careful stewardship of the land. So let's get some pollinator habitat in there. Let's do some let's do a biodiverse mix. And so they did. And now this is a gorgeous site that I take all my best pictures on throughout the summer. Another example of a site that's built by a co-op here is just up the road in Wisconsin. This was late September last year, and this is the same site this year. This is near Brownsville. So now this is their most charismatic of their portfolio of 12 sites. Some of the sites are not so charismatic. But it's not, these sites aren't just good, obviously, for the pollinators. They're also significantly good for foraging birds. That's why National Audubon Society is so excited about this opportunity, because they see the Plants for Birds program as a major priority to create new habitat for birds and provide, abundant sources of the insects that the birds need to survive. And then, if you're not into birds, you're not into pollinators, you're probably into stormwater and soils, and you know that the native plants that are on solar sites perform significantly better, add more organic matter to the soil, and compared to turf grass, over here on the left, break up that compacted soil and really improve the quality of agricultural soils over the 25 to 40-year life of the project. So it's an exciting. Unfortunately, solar got its start in the desert Southwest. So most solar civil engineers are really thinking about that template. That's where they're coming from. They're not thinking about what's under and around the panels. That's why a lot of sites are still designed with gravel. But we're doing education. And there's a large constituency of folks that are significantly supportive of this. Folks in agriculture. So the Minnesota Corn Growers Association partnered with us, Fresh Energy, to define a law, a simple standard, and say, yeah, these solar sites have the opportunity to provide significant habitat to pollinators. And so the bill that they reference here was the effect, a bill basically saying, if you call it pollinator friendly, then it has to meet this standard. The seed mixes that are used on these sites, I mean, this is a very straightforward site, 1,000 acres in Minnesota. It's the largest in the Midwest. A pollinator friendly seed mix of, I think it's like 19 different forbs. And then right up on the Mississippi River, Camp Ripley has a 62-acre site that's really biodiverse, has a great seed mix. The key question that we wanted to make sure that we could credibly answer was not that what we didn't want to have happen was that the intern at the solar company would decide, oh, I know what's good for pollinators, 4 stems of milkweed in the middle of a 40-acre site, I'll get the camera right down there close. So the first call we made was to Dr. Marla Spivak, MacArthur Genius Award winner, and Dr. Karen Oberhauser, who at the time was running Monarch Joint Venture, and we said, we worked on some public policy that's going to result in Minnesota building a couple thousand acres of solar sites. Is that helpful? Is that interesting? We don't know bees. Is that any good? And they said back emphatically, yes. The key is not to be so prescriptive like they were in Europe, where they said, oh, you shall use this seed mix, resulting in that being a national shortage of that particular seed mix and prices going through the roof. But so we worked with entomologists and ecologists and biologists to come up with a simple scorecard. There's more than 100 points available, 130 or so, and there are questions like, what percentage of wildflowers are used on the site? How many native species? What's the diversity of the species? How many flowers, how many seasons of blooming? What are the nearby assets like water or trees or flowering bushes? So we're looking for ways that these sites can be incrementally more beneficial to pollinators. We're not restoring the native landscape. We're trying to say, well, it's going to be gravel or it's going to be turf grass, and it's definitely going to be built. So how do we make sure it can provide incremental benefits to pollinators? So that was why we worked with Marla and Karen and a bunch of others to say, okay, this is the way we should go with this. The result of that was unanimous support for a standard in the state of Minnesota, unanimous support from the House of the Republican House of Representatives in Minnesota for a fair standard. You know, when you go to the store, you kind of know what to expect when you buy something that says organic. There's standards for that. And in the state of Minnesota, we were the first state to say, yeah, if you call it pollinator-friendly solar, there's a meaning. It means you have to meet or exceed the standard. And we took that same piece of public policy and we worked with the corn growers and the grain producers and the soil and water conservation districts and the Farmers Bureau of Maryland and passed the same standard in Maryland. And so not every state is right for a legislative solution, but there's a lot of great corporate partners that create demand. For example, again, just up the road, Organic Valley, one of the largest dairy cooperatives in the state, just announced yesterday that they're going to go 100% renewable, including a whole lot of solar, and all of that solar is going to, let's see, what did they say here? Rather than being planted with turf grass or gravel, the installations will incorporate pollinator-friendly habitat into design. Once complete, these meadows filled with native flowering plants and grasses will create as much bee and butterfly habitat as if 30,000 families were to each plant a 6 by 12-foot garden. So obviously they're translating acres into backyard gardens, but for them, a retail sales company, that's exactly appropriate. So there's a tremendous opportunity for corporate partners to say, this is what we want. Sometimes it's a state solution, sometimes it's through corporate leadership. And you know, for all of you and you know that your colleagues, there's definitely an opportunity to say, hey, when we're getting RFPs for solar, we could just add it to the RFP. We could just say, maybe we'd like for it to be pollinator friendly, just to see what we get. Purdue Farms, the largest producer of poultry in the country, has also committed to going pollinator friendly. They're retrofitting their headquarters array, multi-acre array next to their headquarters, and then they're building a bunch more solar on the East Coast. And just like with Lee mentioned, the National Renewable Energy Lab is helping make the business case for this really easy and straightforward. Because you all know sometimes there's higher upfront costs for that high quality seed mix, but what the National Renewable Energy Lab is studying is all of the different ways that solar companies and utilities that are building solar can save a lot of money by accelerated permitting, by having to do less grading, by all of the different little ways that solar projects get slowed down. And if they were simply more beautiful and provided more habitat for pollinators and did more good things for the soil, that they could actually go faster. So this is a chart that we're all know and we're all familiar with, and I was really touched by Andre's comments this morning, really touching back not just to food, but to society and to the stories. My new take on the pollinator question started with, you know, and what they do and their significant contribution started with that individual experience of, I mean, someone had challenged me and said, wow, I didn't really realize this salad is like the result of all of these visits. And I went, well, how many visits, actually? So I called up Rufus Isaacs, lead blueberry scientist in Michigan, and said, well, how many visits for a single blueberry? And it's 2 to 3 visits. And then I did the same thing in Cornell, and they said, well, it's 2 to 4 visits per apple. And then another person and found out it's 5 to 6 visits for each and every market-ready raspberry. And then for strawberries, it's 20 to 40 visits for each and every market-ready strawberry. So just a simple fruit salad made with these ingredients is like more than 1,000 individual visits by pollinators to flowers, which is really exciting once you start doing the math on coffee, because there's a lot of coffee out there. And to maximize the yield, there's a lot of wind pollinated in coffee, but to maximize the yield of coffee, you need pollinators. And so 20 to 40 visits for each coffee cherry gets you 2 coffee beans. So 1 cup of coffee right here, of which I've probably had 5 today, is 1,000 pollinator visits right there. So certainly there's a great amount of data that we as a solar industry, obviously we're a nonprofit, but the solar industry can do to help agriculture understand that we can help them. By providing benefits to pollinators, we can significantly help agriculture. We can help them increase net revenue for a wide variety of crops. Because the alternative The alternative has already been tested, and it's already been taken to scale. It's in use right now in southwest China, where they're hand-pollinating pear trees. And I've got a dozen pictures like this and other ones, but they're lashing chicken feathers to bamboo rods, and then they're using those tools to pollinate the trees by hand. So, and yet, I'm sorry to beat up on Ohio. This was one that was just in the news, so I'm using it. But solar sites are still getting designed and built, and they look like this. And so the work we're doing and other ones are getting built and designed, and they look like this. And solar companies and utility companies, folks in the electricity industry, we look at this and go, hey, that looks like a good project. Farmers, they're not so sure. They're not so sure. They're showing up at public meetings just about as enthusiastically as they might when a new transmission line is proposed. We've all been there. So, so we want to see these projects provide significantly more benefits to them. So these are 13 projects that were built now in Wisconsin. And the right thing to do once you've built it and done it is certainly to give the beautiful pictures to your CEO and put them out in front of a bunch of people and let them take a victory lap and say, you know what, we were going to build a bunch of solar. Turned out we were building gardens for bees. So this is Barb Nick, the CEO of Dairyland Power. And then Greg Ritterbush of the largest rural electric cooperative in Minnesota. He is just absolutely thrilled. I've got some video from him. This is obviously his site. They did a big membership newsletter. They communicated to their members about here's all the ways that you, with just your purchase of electricity, are actually helping to save the bees. So let's hear it from Greg. Get the audio here. So Greg is being very eloquent and saying, it's not just about kilowatt hours now. We have to do more. We can do more than just charge our iPhones. We can demonstrate our co-op values by doing more for wildlife, by doing more for the soil, and by demonstrating these conservation values. So, and of course, the media freaked out. I mean, he said, we've been providing reliable, consistent electric power for going on 50 years now, and no one's ever talked to me in the grocery store. I add some flowers and some bees to my solar array. People are coming up to me in the grocery store, and I have multiple cameras and radio stations and TV, showing up for a news conference at our headquarters. Media love this. It's so beautiful. I mean, this idea. So what they're doing is they hired some beekeepers to tend hives adjacent to their pollinator-friendly solar arrays. The beekeepers are calling this solar honey. It's delicious, which is great. Because when was the last time you said, oh, there's something I got from a utility company. It's delicious. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. I did not think that when I paid my electric utility bill. But these two entrepreneurs, they've been covered in National Geographic and Martha Stewart magazine, Modern Farmer, Smithsonian, and then a few more outlets. Did we get the audio fixed? Maybe. So they've been written up in Sustainable Brands and International Business Times. Oh, we could stick the microphone down here if we have to.
There's some new buzz going on at Connexus Energy in Ramsey. For nearly 3 years, the utility has been producing renewable energy for some customers. Now you can add honey production to the list. CTS Jordan Rylance explains.
Ramsey is home to the country's first pollinator-friendly community solar garden, producing not only honey, but renewable energy.
Without bees, we lose a huge percentage of the fruits and vegetables that we eat.
Following Minnesota's adoption of a law and statewide standard for pollinator-friendly solar, Connexus Energy's solar garden was scored well above the level required, calling it an exemplary pollinator habitat. The solar garden will now be home to 15 colonies of honeybees, specifically brought in to pollinate plants and flowers and produce honey.
We're just really excited about being able to put our hives in a spot that's intentionally planted pollinator-friendly. At this day and age, it's one of the bigger struggles that beekeepers have is finding healthy areas to put your bees.
This solar garden is capable of producing millions of honeybees. That honey will then be given to Connexus Energy solar subscribers. For CTN Community Update, I'm Jordan Rylands.
A portion of the honey produced will be named SolarWise Honey, recognizing Connexus Energy's successful community solar garden program.
I just love that story. I just love local news outlets too. It's so good.
There's some new buzz.
Maybe just once had though. So, and the beautiful thing about solar honey is it's not just something you spread on your toast. It's something you can put on your ice cream. It's something you can do a whole bunch of different things with. So these are some cups. These are 2 radio station celebrities, local celebrities in Minneapolis. They were sampling some solar honey and promoting it during the Minnesota State Fair, which is, you know, a couple million people go there every year. But what a great way to engage with your constituents, with your members, and get some really good, positive buzz. It's unavoidable. So the solar honey swirl absolutely tasted delicious. Oh, I see that there's a graphic here that did not work. That big W is the state of Minnesota. So envision the state of Minnesota. And so ultimately this message is really about that this is actually a solution that can scale. I mean, I know that you guys manage, you know, millions of acres. Solar is not just some, you know, like little rooftop thing. The prices are falling so quickly, 60% in just the last 5 years, that more and more and more solar is being built. So just 1 year in 2016 in Minnesota, we built and seeded and planted 1.4 or 2,350 acres of pollinator-friendly solar array, pollinator-friendly solar arrays. So that's equivalent to 1.5 million backyard gardens. Nationwide, it's much larger. So this is a trend that is significantly increasing, and in just a couple of years, we'll have more than 100,000 acres of solar being built each and every single year, as solar goes from 1% to 2% to 3% of America's, you know, generation portfolio. And what I'm so excited about is just for sites to more often look like this than to look like gravel. We had to pay that monarch a lot. Thank you. If you're interested in learning way more about that, on my Twitter, I tweeted this morning or yesterday a 2-hour webinar that goes way down into the economics and the details, and it's not just me. There's like 6 or 7 people. So if you really want to answer all your questions, just see me on Twitter, and then that's a link to the webinar. Yeah. Thank you. And I'm available tonight and then gone tomorrow.
Hey, Rob, great presentation.
Hey.
2 questions. One,
yeah.
A simple one. We hear excuses all the time, right? Does anyone ever say, what about the bee stings? That's a reportable safety event. And my second question is there any secrets to how those people control the weeds? Because I know you've seen some of the pictures of our solar sites in less than 1 year, even before they're constructed, how the weeds can be a real problem.
Yes. A wise man once told me that mowing is not management. And you know, there's certainly several people here, including the speaker immediately after me, that has some amazing insights on how to do a much better job of vegetation management. And that's having a portfolio of strategies, including herbicide, including manual extraction. I can't emphasize enough the important role of site prep. Site prep is really critical. And if you'll hear it in the webinar. I mean, these guys are talking about, just after 12 months, you have to use a thrashing mower, not a sickle mower, because of XYZ. And those first 2 years are really critical to your site thriving or your site becoming a weedy mess. But yeah, on the OSHA issue, we've looked into that extensively because it's not just bees. This is a much bigger problem. If the monarch gets listed, then there'll be massive changes in agriculture. And bringing that back, basically the Farm Bureau is also very, very aware of, that they need these species to survive, but they're also aware that, mosquitoes can, you can get Zika from mosquitoes, which is OSHA reportable. You can get Lyme disease from ticks, which is OSHA reportable. Utilities need to be very aware about how to manage that. It might be through a subcontractor. Or I know that EPRI is very much engaged in finding a solution to the OSHA issue.
Yeah, it's not like they don't deal with it on transmission lines. I was just interested in your response.
Yeah,
So,
well, it's a new question to the solar guys. They're like, oh my gosh, what if these sites attract monarchs? And that's kind of old hat for you guys.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
What's your guys' game plan for long-term maintenance, like woody vegetation and some other invasives, and grasses taking over the, all the wildflowers?
Yeah, well, thankfully, that's not me. So we simply the role that I play, about half of my time is probably spent engaging with folks developing solar arrays and helping just to get them off of gravel, and doing something that is, ideally off of just turf grass, and doing something, again, that's incrementally more beneficial to pollinators. So Prairie Restorations manages a lot of the landscapes that were pictured in this presentation. They've got 6 or 8 offices throughout Minnesota, and they service more than 800 acres of solar arrays throughout the Midwest. So they're in the webinar, the 2-hour webinar where they get into those long details. Yeah, so they'll ideally, you have a whole different range of different sites. Some, there's ideally the fewer are get more complicated, but the majority should get easier and easier and easier with less and less and less management. So everything we're seeing is that the solar companies have done the math, and it significantly pencils out that there's a long-term cost savings versus mowing, because when mowers collide with solar panels, bankers get upset. Well, thank you all. I'll be around.